giving all praise and honor to God, bringing me here today. It is an extraordinary honor to have an opportunity to be here at Hampton. It's a privilege to stand with so many ministers from across this country, and we thank God and His blessings for this wonderful day. I want to thank University President Dr. William Harvey, all the excellent work that he's done. Thank you. The conference president, Dr. William Curtis, thank you so much. Thank you. Conference secretary, Dr. Timothy Body, thank you. To all the conference officers, ministers, friends, dignitaries, Congressman Bobby Scott for his outstanding work. We're grateful for him. And then I've got to give a special shout out to my pastor, the guy who puts up with me, counsels me, listens to my wife complain about me. He's a friend and a great leader, not just in Chicago, but all across the country. So please, everybody, give an extraordinary welcome to my pastor, Dr. Jeremiah A. Wright, Jr., President of the United Church of Christ. Where's he at? There he is. That's him. That's him right there. You're wearing a suit today, right? Well, I am so grateful to be with all of you here today. I generally try to avoid speaking at ministers' conferences because you got too many good preachers in this auditorium, and it makes the politicians look pale and uninspiring in comparison. I'm not going to try to shout. I'm not going to try to compete. I just want to concede right now. You got some better speakers on this stage than me. So please don't hold me to those high standards. But, you know, sometimes the Spirit moves me, and not necessarily today. But a few weeks ago, I attended a service at First AME Church in Los Angeles to commemorate the 15th anniversary of the Los Angeles riots. Some of you remember that after a jury acquitted 4 police officers of beating Rodney King, a beating that was filmed and flashed all around the world, L.A. erupted. I remember the sense of despair and powerlessness in watching one of America's greatest cities engulfed in flames. But in the middle of that desperate time, there was a miracle that took place. I remember reading about this news article, and I clipped it, I saved it, and I referred to this article 15 years later, a story about a baby born with a bullet in its arm. What had happened was that a doctor named Andy Musa was relating this story. He was working the afternoon shift on April 30th at St. Francis Medical Center in Linwood as the second day of violence was exploding in the streets. And he tells us about a pregnant woman who had been wearing a white dress. She was in Compton. She was on her way to the supermarket. In her car, suddenly her sister-in-law notices a red spot in the middle of that white dress and says, "I think you've been shot." The bullet had gone in, but it had not exited. The doctor described in this article the ultrasound and how he realized that the bullet was in the baby. The doctor said we could tell it was lodged in one of the upper limbs. We needed to get this baby out, so we were in the delivery room right away. And here's the thing. if you sometimes lose faith, here's the part of the story to remember. The baby looked great, except for the swelling in the right elbow in the fleshy part where the bullet had gone in. Nothing else was wrong with the baby. Hadn't even fractured a bone. The bullet had lodged in the soft tissue and the muscle. By God's grace, the baby was fine. It was breathing and crying, kicking. Took the baby out, removed the bullet, stitched up the baby's arm, and everything was fine. Praise God. The doctor went on to say that there would always be a scar to remind that child how quickly she came into the world in this very unusual circumstance. I've been thinking and praying about that story. I've been thinking that there's always going to be a scar there. That doesn't go away. You take the bullet out. You stitch up the wound. 15 years later, there's still going to be a scar, but yet somewhere this young 15-year-old lady is walking around. She's remembering the circumstance of her birth, but because somebody took the time to heal her, she's going to be fine. Many of the folks in this room know just where they were when the riot struck in Los Angeles, when tragedy struck the corner of Florence and Normandy. Most of the ministers here know that those riots didn't erupt overnight. There had been a quiet riot building up in Los Angeles and across this country for years. If you'd gone to any street corner in Chicago, or Baton Rouge, or Hampton, you would have found some of the same young men and women without hope, without miracles, without a sense of destiny, other than life on the edge of the law, the edge of the economy, the edge of family structures, the edge of communities. These quiet riots that take place every day are born from the same place as the fires and destruction and the police decked out in riot gear and death. They happen when a sense of disconnect settles in and hope dissipates. Despair takes hold, and young people all across the country look at the way the world is and they believe that things are never going to get better. You tell yourself, my school will always be second rate. You tell yourself, there will never be a good job waiting for me to excel at. You tell yourself, I will never be able to afford a place that I can be proud of and call my home. That despair quietly simmers and makes it impossible to build strong communities and neighborhoods. And then one afternoon a jury says, not guilty. Or a hurricane hits New Orleans. And that despair is revealed for the world to see. Much of what we saw on our television screens 15 years ago was Los Angeles expressing a lingering, ongoing, pervasive legacy, a tragic legacy out of the tragic history of this country, a history that this country has never fully come to terms with. This is not to excuse the violence of bashing in a man's head or destroying somebody's store and their life's work. That kind of violence is inexcusable and self-defeating. But it does describe the reality of many communities around this country. And it made me think about our cities and our communities around this country and how not only do we still have the scars of the riots and the quiet riots that happen every day, but how in too many places all across the country, we haven't even bothered to take the bullet out. We have left the bullet in. Look at what happened in New Orleans and along the Gulf Coast when Katrina hit. People asked me whether they thought race was the reason the response was so slow. I said, well, no, this administration was colorblind in its incompetence. But everyone here knows that the disaster and the poverty happened long before the hurricane hit. All the hurricane did was make bare what we ignore each and every day, which is that there are whole sets of communities that are impoverished, whole sets of communities that don't have meaningful opportunity and don't have hope and are forgotten. Disaster had been going on for generations. All the hurricane did was pull back the screen so we could see what had been taking place. And of course, the federal response after Katrina was similar to the response we saw after the riots in L.A. You know what happens. Bobby knows what happens. People in Washington, they wake up. They're surprised. There's poverty in our midst. Folks are frustrated. Black people angry. And then there's going to be some panels, and their hearings, and their commissions, and their reports. And then there's some aid money, although we don't always know where it's going. It can't seem to get to the people who need it. And nothing really changes except the news coverage quiets down and Anderson Cooper's on to something else. And the quiet riot keeps on. Our churches were generous. Our denominations were generous during this time. Some of the people who are here today gathered up millions of dollars, sent thousands of volunteers, countless prayers down on the Gulf Coast. But despite this extraordinary generosity, here we are 20 months later. 20 months later, or 15 years later in the case of Los Angeles, and the homes haven't been built, the businesses haven't returned, those same communities are still drowning and smoldering under the same hopelessness as before the hurricane hit. And so God is asking us today to remember the miracle of that baby, and he's asking us, he says, take the bullet out. If we have more black men in prison than in our colleges and universities, then it's time to take the bullet out. If we have millions of people going to the emergency room for treatable illnesses like asthma, it's time to take the bullet out. If too many of our kids don't have health insurance, it's time to take that bullet out. If we keep sending our kids to crumbling school buildings, if we keep fighting this war in Iraq, a war that should have never been authorized and should have never been waged, a war that's costing us $275 million a day that could have been invested in rebuilding communities all across this country, it is time to take that bullet out. We have all these challenges, and nothing's changing. Then every minister in America needs to get into the ER and perform some surgery. Take this bullet out. What's stopping us? What's stopping us from taking these bullets out and rebuilding our families, our communities, our nation, and our faith in one another? What's stopping us from seeing the light and the way and the faith that unites us? You know, I've been on a journey trying to get a truth to that question for a long time. I mentioned Reverend Wright. I first met Reverend Wright when I moved to Chicago after college. I'd been inspired by the civil rights movement. The images of young people, straight back, clear-eyed, marching for their freedom, sitting down at lunch counters, going to jail. I had been too young to participate, but I wanted to be a part of that. So there had been a group of churches on the far south side of Chicago that were trying to deal with the devastation of steel plants that had closed and communities that had fallen onto hard times. And so I worked with these churches for 3.5 years, trying to get pastors and lay people to work together to help rebuild communities. And that's where I met Reverend Wright and started going to Trinity United Church of Christ. And he helped me on another journey and introduced me to someone named Jesus Christ. And I learned that my sins could be redeemed. I learned that those things that I was too weak to accomplish myself, maybe he could accomplish them for me if I placed my trust in him. And I learned that ordinary people can achieve extraordinary things when they believe in him and they come together and are guided by him. We understand the possibilities of God's power, but we don't always seek it out. We push it aside. We get caught up in the powers and the principalities and what they can do for us, what they offer us, materialism, prestige, fame. That's what happens to our politics and our politicians. Politics has become a business and not a mission. Power is always trumping principle. Our leadership, sometimes long on rhetoric, but short on follow-through. We get discouraged. We feel cynical. The leaders in Washington have forgotten President Kennedy's call to remember that here on earth, God's work must truly be our own. In the last several years, we've seen Washington become a place where driving the wedge to further divide us and keep score of who's up and who's down is more important than who's working on behalf of the sick and the hungry and the lonely and the homeless. We've been told that our mounting debts don't matter. We can give tax cuts to the wealthiest folks in this nation, folks who don't need them and weren't even asking for them, and we'll fight a war at the same time. And don't worry about trillions of dollars of debt. Somebody else is going to pay for it. Been told the economy is doing great. You don't have health care, you don't have a job, you're just not working hard enough. Tough luck. You're on your own. Been told the people's anxieties about rising health care costs and disappearing pensions aren't a big deal. Stop being so pessimistic. Stop engaging in class warfare, we're told. We've been told that climate change is a hoax. Our broken schools can't be fixed. We're destined to send millions of dollars a day in oil money to Middle East dictators, that we can't do anything about Darfur, that Africa and AIDS is not our problem. And when it comes to faith, we've been told that all that matters is what divides us. Evangelicals, don't be talking to mainland Protestants. Black church, that's different from the white church. Had stories about Trinity United Church of Christ because we talked about black people in church. Oh, that might be a separatist church. Catholics can't be getting together with Protestants or Muslims or Jews. And when we have an honest debate about the crisis we face, whether it's from the pulpit or the campaign trail, the pundits don't want us to find common ground. They want us to find somebody to blame. They want to divide us into red states and blue states and tell us to always point fingers at somebody else, the other party, or people of a different faith, or immigrants, or gay people. The journey teaches us that they are going to keep on trying to drive that wedge. They're going to keep those distractions going. They're going to keep our faith separate until we shout from the mountaintop, "Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name." We believe in you. We believe in your will and your way. And that we are all God's children. And we can all unite to work together to make sure that the vulnerable and the aged and the sick and our children are cared for in this country. We can take that bullet out if we work together as a team. Right here in this room, we believe that God is big enough to overcome the smallness of our politics. He's big enough to overcome our doubts and our cynicism and our worries. He's big enough to love children of every color and creed and political labor. It's time to unite behind our faith and help all of God's children around the world and here at home to realize that we're all surgeons, we're all nurses, we're all orderlies. Let's start out with fighting poverty in this country. 37 million Americans are poor. Most of them work. Most are single mothers and children. Most are forgotten by leaders in Washington and by the media elites. It's time to take the bullet out and lift the poor out of despair and in the middle class of America. That's why throughout my years in the Illinois Senate and every day on this campaign, I've been fighting to expand the earned income tax credit so that if somebody is working full-time, they should be able to have a living wage. We should be increasing the minimum wage so people aren't in poverty working 40 hours a week. We should put a qualified teacher and more math and science teachers in our struggling schools and pay our teachers more if we value education. Don't talk about leave no child behind and then leave the money behind for no child left behind. We don't need slogans. We need federal dollars. Increase Pell Grants. Every child who's qualified should be able to go to college. Build more homes that people can afford. A $400,000 home is not affordable housing. Go after predatory lenders that are taking advantage of folks who are just trying to pursue the American dream. Make sure that we rebuild New Orleans and the Gulf. Stop going, cut the bureaucracy, cut the red tape. Think about it. There's a law. I just want to give you one example because this really steams me up. This isn't in the prepared remarks. Down in New Orleans, where they still have not rebuilt 20 months later, there's a law, federal law, when you get reconstruction money from the federal government called the Stafford Act. And basically it says when you get federal money, you've got to give a 10% match. The local government's got to come up with 10%. Every $10 federal government comes up with, local government's got to give $1. Now here's the thing. When 9/11 happened in New York City, they waived the Stafford Act, said this is too serious a problem. We can't expect New York City to rebuild on its own. Forget that dollar you got to put in. Well, here's $10. And that was the right thing to do. When Hurricane Andrew struck in Florida, people said, look at this devastation. We don't expect you to come up with your own money here. Here's the money to rebuild. We're not going to wait for you to scratch it together because you're part of the American family. What's happening down in New Orleans? Where's your dollar? Where's your Stafford Act money? Makes no sense. Tells me the bullet hasn't been taken out. Tells me that somehow the people down in New Orleans, they don't care about as much. We need to do more than just fight poverty in this country. There are a couple things that we can also do to diminish poverty if we approach it in two ways, by taking mutual responsibility for each other as a society, but also asking more individual responsibility to strengthen our families. If we want to stop the cycle of poverty, we need to start with our families. We need to start supporting parents with young children. There is a pioneering program, Nurse Family Partnership, right now, offers home visits by trained registered nurses to low-income mothers and mothers-to-be. These mothers love their children, but they don't always know, Bishop, what to do. Don't know that you shouldn't be giving them Jay's potato chips for breakfast. Don't know that you should turn off the TV and read a book to them once in a while. And so the nurses work with them. Learn how to care for themselves before the baby's born and to do after. We know that you invest $1 in this, you get $3 back. We save money by making sure the parents are doing the right thing by their children. Why aren't we expanding those programs? Raises healthy babies and creates better parents. Produces more than $28,000 in net savings for every high-risk family enrolled in the program. And that's why we're going to expand this, make sure that 500,000 families get this all across the country under the Obama presidency. We can do this. Our God is big enough to accomplish that. We need to give our young people some real choices so they move away from gangs and violence and connect to the growing job sector. We know that our young people get in trouble after school, so we got to expand after-school programs. We know that low-income children lose what they learned the previous year during the summer school because they don't have fancy camps to go to and enrichment programs. So set up summer school programs for our children in need. I'm going to set up a 5E Youth Service Corps. 5 E's stand for energy efficiency, environmental education, and employment. They're talking about climate change, and rightfully so, and the need to stop global warming. That's all important. But how about if we put young people to work all across the country insulating homes, give them apprenticeships so that they can engage in this new energy efficient economy. There's nothing wrong with that, the same way that we should have had our young people trained to rebuild the homes down in the Gulf. We don't need Halliburton doing it. We can have the people who are displaced doing that work. Our God is big enough to do that. We know that supporting ex-offenders and their families will keep men out of prison in the future. That's why I want to expand federal programs to help ex-offenders and sign the Second Chance Act into law. I don't know why we haven't set up the kinds of support systems for ex-offenders that make sense. We engage in prison ministries all the time, but the federal government and state governments have not invested the way they need to. I don't know who thought that it was smart that it was the smart thing to do to take educational programs out of our prisons when we know that our young men and increasingly young women who are in there are illiterate and need the education so that they can adapt and get on the right course. We need to invest in transitional jobs. When there are people who are homeless, veterans struggling from post-traumatic stress disorder from this war in Iraq, thousands of children aging out of foster care, we can't expect them to have all the skills they need to work. They may need help with basic skills, how to shop, how to show up to work on time, how to wear the right clothes, how to act appropriately in an office. We have to help them get there. That's why I've called for an innovative job training program and workforce development programs, millions of dollars targeted directly at these folks who just need a leg in to the economy. Transportation assistance. Low-income workers spend up to 36% of their incomes on transportation. Some of them spending two hours each way commuting back and forth from work. That's why I'll fight to ensure that the federal Job Access and Reverse Commute Program provide grants to improve low-income access to transportation. And that's why we need additional federal public transportation dollars flowing to the highest need communities. We don't need to build more highways out in the suburbs if we have people in the cities right now who want to work but have no way to get into those jobs. We've got to help connect them to the jobs that exist. We should be investing in minority-owned businesses in our neighborhoods so people don't have to travel for miles away. Less than 1% of the $250 billion in venture capital dollars that we invest nationwide each year has been directed to the country's minority business owners. In recent years, there's been a significant decline in the share of the small business investment company financings that have gone to minority-owned and women-owned businesses. We're going to change that and strengthen the Small Business Administration to provide more capital to minority-owned businesses. We can do that. We need to bring an end to redlining and improve the Community Reinvestment Act and make sure that we have dollars flowing because there are budding entrepreneurs, and the only opportunities they should have should not just be in the drug trade. We should be giving them financing to open up all kinds of businesses. And here's one final idea that will help break the cycle of poverty: affordable health care for every single American. Our God is big enough for that. You know, the other day I spent a lot of time in Iowa now. I love the rest of y'all, but a lot of time in Iowa and New Hampshire. And I met a couple who owns a small business in northern Iowa that hundreds of people in their community count on every day to get their internet access. But today they're on the verge of bankruptcy, and it's all because of their health care costs. 17 years ago, the husband had cancer. He's recovered now, but every year since then, his family's premiums have gone up, and they can't find anyone else who will insure them. They now pay 40% of their incomes in health care premiums. They haven't been able to save a dime for their child's college education. They're having trouble paying for things like clothes and gasoline. When the loan officers first uttered the words bankruptcy, it was one of the worst days of their lives. They said, and I'm quoting here, "We've done everything right. We've done everything we're supposed to do. This is not who we are. This is not what was supposed to happen. This is not who we are. I have a health care plan that will cover every American and cut the cost of every family's premium by up to $2,500 a year. If you don't have health care, the plan will offer you coverage that's similar to the kind that Bobby and I get as members of Congress. I don't know why the taxpayers don't have health insurance. When we do, you guys are our bosses. If you do have health care already, it'll bring down your premiums by investing in information technology and preventive care so that children who have treatable illnesses like asthma don't have to go to the emergency room. So that folks with chronic illnesses like diabetes, we're investing in giving them the medicine when they need it and monitoring what they eat and sending them to podiatrists instead of spending $30,000 on a foot amputation. And by the way, while we're at it, we're going to say to the drug companies, we're going to negotiate for the best price. We're tired of you price gouging. And we're going to say to the insurance companies, stop spending more money denying coverage than paying coverage. If we do all that, we can save $100 billion a year and give health insurance to every single American by the end of the next president's first term. By the end of my first term as President of the United States of America, every person can have health care coverage in this country. Now, I know I'm probably running long, so let me close by just saying this. You know, before we start all this work, ending poverty, providing health care, job opportunities, improving our education system, we need to stop spending that money in Iraq. I am proud I opposed this war from the very beginning, back in 2002, when it wasn't popular to be against the war. Everybody's against the war now. I want to make that point. I opposed it because I believe strongly that it could lead to disaster that we find ourselves in today. Our brave young servicemen and women mired in the middle of a civil war. That's why I introduced a plan at the beginning of this year that said we got to have all our combat troops out by March 31st of next year. Force the Iraqi government to meet its obligations. We need 16 Republican votes in the Senate to vote this president should change course in Iraq. That's the only chance we have to end this war in Iraq. That is real. That's not symbolism. 16 votes in the Senate, comparable number in the House, and we can bring an end to this war. Our God is big enough to help us do that, but we've got to stand up and say, it is time for us to end this war in Iraq. And we all know that our faith will be tested, that it will be challenged. We know that our faith sometimes has been used as a wedge to divide us. But we also know that with a big God, with a loving and forceful God, if we unite in His name, we can finish His work on earth. In the face of impossible odds, people who love their country can change it. With a uniting faith with a God powerful enough to empower us, we can take those bullets out. Y'all watch TV, you know how the doctors do it. The doctors are in the operating room. You've got a head surgeon, the one who's got the scalpel, but the others are watching the monitors and administering the IV The nurses are on the job. The orderlies are on the job. There was a team that took that bullet out of the baby 15 years ago. She's got a scar on her arm, always will, but she will survive. Just like America will survive. Just like black folks will survive. We won't forget where we came from. We won't forget what happened 19 months ago, or 15 years ago, or 300 years ago. We know who the head surgeon is. We're on the case. We're going to pull bullet after bullet out. We're going to stitch up arm after arm. We're going to wear those scars proudly because they signify our past and our pursuit of justice. We're going to usher in a new America the way that newborn child was ushered in. We're never going to forget that there is always hope. There's always light in the midst of desperate days, that a baby can be born even in the midst of a riot and a bullet in her arm. We can come together as one people and transform this nation. Our God is big enough for miracles. Thank you very much, Hampton University. God bless you all. Thank you. Thank you.